The dusty auction block stood like a gallows against the blazing Texas sun of 1876, where Delilah Morgan clutched her swollen belly, her face streaked with tears and dirt as the crowd jeered at the pregnant woman about to be sold to the highest bidder. "What we got here is damaged goods, gentlemen," the auctioneer announced with a cruel chuckle, pushing Delilah forward so roughly she nearly lost her footing. 6 months along by the look of her and no husband in sight. Previous owner don't want the burden no more. Delilah kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her honey blonde hair falling in matted strands around her face. At 22, she'd already endured more suffering than most faced in a lifetime. Her dress, once a respectable calico, hung in tatters around her frame, the fabric straining against her growing child. The child whose father had abandoned them both when the pregnancy was discovered, leaving her at the mercy of her employer who had sold her contract to the auction house when her condition became impossible to hide. "Starting bid is $10, the auctioneer called out to scattered laughter. "Any takers for this sorry sight? $5, a voice called from the back, followed by more cruel laughter. $3 and a bottle of whiskey, shouted another. Delilah closed her eyes, fighting back fresh tears. These weren't bids meant to purchase. They were mockery, salt in her already gaping wounds. At the edge of the crowd, Xavier York watched with a tightening jaw. He'd come to Redemption, Texas, to purchase supplies, not to witness human suffering. His cattle ranch 10 miles outside of town needed hands, not complications. Yet something in the woman's quiet dignity amid such cruelty stirred something primal in him. $7, called a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth. She can cook and clean while she's still able, and after the brat comes, 2 for the price of 1. More laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer was about to bring down his gavel when a clear voice cut through the jeering. $100 in gold. The crowd fell silent, parting as Xavier stepped forward. At 30, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd carved his existence from the unforgiving frontier. His dark hair fell in waves beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes, steely blue and unflinching, were fixed on the auctioneer. "What's that you say, mister?" the auctioneer asked, disbelief evident in his tone. Xavier reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the platform, where it landed with a heavy clink of metal. $100 in gold, he repeated, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "She's worth gold, not your mockery." For the first time since the auction began, Delilah raised her head. Her green eyes, though red-rimmed from crying, held a flicker of something not quite hope, but perhaps the first stirrings of it. The auctioneer snatched up the pouch, quickly peering inside. His eyebrows shot up at the glint of gold coins. "Sold," he declared hastily, bringing down his gavel with finality. "To the gentleman with more money than sense." Xavier ignored the comment, stepping forward to the auction block. He extended his hand to Delilah, who hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. "I won't hurt you, madam," he said quietly, his words meant only for her. "You have my word." After a moment's hesitation, Delilah placed her trembling hand in his, allowing him to help her down from the platform. The crowd, disappointed that their entertainment had been cut short, began to disperse, some casting curious glances at the unlikely pair. "Why?" Delilah whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Xavier didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his duster and placed it gently around her shoulders, shielding her from both the sun and the prying eyes of the townsfolk. "Let's get you somewhere safe first," he said, guiding her toward his wagon. "Then we can talk." As he helped her onto the seat of his wagon, Delilah winced, placing a protective hand over her belly. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked, concern furrowing his brow. "Just tired," she replied softly. "And hungry?" Xavier nodded, his expression grim. "We'll remedy that straight away." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "My name is Xavier York. I have a ranch outside of town." "Delilah," she replied hesitantly. "Delilah Morgan." Xavier clicked his tongue, setting the horses in motion. As they pulled away from the auction square, he spoke without looking at her. "Miss Morgan, I want you to understand something. I purchased your contract, but you're not my property. Once you're well enough to decide your own path, you're free to take it." Delilah stared at him in disbelief. Freedom was a concept so foreign she could scarcely comprehend it. "I don't understand." "You will," Xavier replied simply. "For now, just rest." As the wagon rolled out of Redemption, Delilah clutched Xavier's duster tighter around her shoulders. She didn't understand this man or his motives, but for the first time in months, the knot of fear in her chest began to loosen, if only slightly. Xavier kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, acutely aware of the woman beside him. He hadn't planned on bringing anyone back to the Double Cross Ranch today, especially not a pregnant woman with nowhere else to go. But some things a man couldn't walk away from, not if he wanted to look himself in the mirror come morning. The 10-mile journey to the Double Cross passed in relative silence. Delilah, exhausted from the ordeal and the relentless Texas heat, eventually dozed off, her head nodding against her chest. Xavier stole occasional glances at her, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes and the way her hands chapped and reddened from hard work, remained protectively curled around her belly, even in sleep. The ranch came into view as they crested a gentle hill, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with cattle and horses. It wasn't the grandest spread in the territory, but Xavier had built it from nothing over the past 5 years, and pride swelled in his chest every time he returned to it. As the wagon approached, a wiry older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Joe Winters had been with Xavier since the beginning, serving as foreman and on occasion voice of reason. "Didn't expect you back so soon," Joe called, then stopped short when he spotted Delilah. His bushy eyebrows shot up, but he was wise enough not to immediately comment. "Joe, we have a guest," Xavier said as he brought the wagon to a stop. "This is Miss Delilah Morgan. She'll be staying with us for a while." Joe's gaze flickered briefly to Delilah's condition, but his weathered face revealed nothing. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod. "Welcome to the Double Cross." Delilah awakened as the wagon stopped, momentarily disoriented. She blinked up at the ranch house, then at the old cowboy regarding her with curious but kind eyes. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Xavier jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Delilah descend. She moved gingerly, one hand braced against her lower back. "Joe, would you mind asking Maria to prepare a room for Miss Morgan, and perhaps draw a bath?" Xavier asked. "Already on it," Joe replied, heading toward the house. "I reckon Maria will be mighty pleased to have another woman around the place." Xavier led Delilah toward the house, conscious of her slow, careful steps. "Maria is our housekeeper," he explained. "She's been with me since I started the ranch. Mexican lady, widow, heart of gold, but will scold you something fierce if you track mud on her clean floors." The ghost of a smile flickered across Delilah's face, so brief Xavier almost missed it. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, simple but well furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. The floors were polished wood, covered in places with colorful woven rugs. It spoke of prosperity without ostentation. A plump woman with silver-streaked black hair bustled into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Delilah, but like Joe, she quickly masked her surprise. "Maria, this is Miss Morgan," Xavier said. "She'll be our guest for a while." Maria's gaze softened as she took in Delilah's condition and bedraggled appearance. "Pobrecita," she murmured. "Come, come, we get you clean, fed, rested." She moved forward, gently taking Delilah's arm. "You are safe now, yes, no worry." Delilah looked uncertainly at Xavier, who nodded encouragingly. "Go with Maria. She'll take good care of you. We can talk more once you're settled." As Maria led Delilah toward the back of the house, Xavier heard the older woman already fussing in a mixture of English and Spanish. "Too thin, even with bébé. We fix, yes, Maria will fix." Left alone in the main room, Xavier removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Joe appeared in the doorway, a questioning look on his weathered face. "Found her on the auction block in town," Xavier explained quietly. "They were treating her like she wasn't even human." Joe nodded slowly. That explains the look in her eyes. Seen it before in the war, folk who have been treated worse than animals. She's staying until she decides otherwise, Xavier said firmly. I want that clear with everyone on the ranch. You're the boss, Joe replied simply. After a moment's hesitation, he added, Town's gonna talk. Xavier's jaw tightened. Let them, wouldn't be the first time. Joe nodded and turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you did right by that girl today. We'll see, Xavier replied, his gaze drifting toward the hallway where Delilah had disappeared. We'll see. In a small bedroom at the back of the house, Delilah sank gratefully into a steaming bath, the first proper one she'd had in months. Maria had filled it with some kind of fragrant herbs that eased the ache in her back and brought color to her pale cheeks. You eat after bath, Maria declared, laying out a simple cotton nightgown and robe. Then sleep. Everything better after sleep. Left alone, Delilah leaned back in the tub, one hand resting on her swollen belly where her child shifted restlessly. Tears welled in her eyes, but for once they weren't tears of despair. We're safe for now, little one, she whispered to her unborn child. At least for now. She couldn't make sense of Xavier York or his unexpected kindness. In her experience, men wanted something in return for such gestures, yet he had promised her freedom, not servitude. It seemed too good to be true, and Delilah had learned the hard way that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Still, as she soaked in the warm water, feeling truly clean for the first time in ages, Delilah allowed herself a small measure of hope. Tomorrow would bring what it would. For tonight, she and her child were safe, fed, and sheltered. It was more than she had dared to hope for just hours ago. Xavier sat at his desk late into the night, ledgers open before him but his mind elsewhere. The woman sleeping in the guest room at the end of the hall was a complication he hadn't anticipated. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret his impulsive action at the auction. A soft knock at his study door roused him from his thoughts. Maria entered, carrying a tray with coffee. She sleeps, the housekeeper reported, setting the tray on his desk. Ate good first, very hungry that one, Xavier nodded. Thank you for looking after her, Maria. The older woman fixed him with a knowing look. What happens to her before? I don't know the details, Xavier admitted. Found her being auctioned off in town. They were mocking her condition, treating her like she was worthless. Maria's expression darkened. Some men, no souls, she muttered. The bébé, I didn't ask. You did good thing, patron, Maria said firmly. God sees. After she left, Xavier poured himself a cup of coffee and moved to the window. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Texas sky. Somewhere out there, beyond his property, was whatever or whoever had brought Delilah Morgan to such desperate straits. He sipped his coffee, a resolution forming in his mind. Whatever happened next, he would ensure that Delilah and her child would have a fighting chance. Not charity, he suspected she'd balk at that, but opportunity. Everyone deserved at least that much. Delilah awoke the next morning disoriented, momentarily panicked until memory returned. The softness beneath her was a real bed, not the hard ground or rough cots she'd grown accustomed to. Sunlight streamed through curtained windows, casting the small bedroom in a gentle glow. She sat up carefully, her body still aching but refreshed from the first decent night's sleep she'd had in months. The clean nightgown felt strange against her skin after so long in filthy rags. On a chair nearby lay a simple dress that looked as though it might accommodate her growing belly, likely left by Maria. A knock at the door startled her. Miss Morgan, Xavier's voice called, breakfast is ready whenever you are, no rush. Thank you, she called back, her voice stronger than it had been the previous day. I'll be out shortly. Dressing proved challenging with her swollen belly, but the dress fit reasonably well. It was plain but clean and whole, a luxury she'd almost forgotten. She found a brush on the dresser and attempted to tame her tangled hair, wincing as she worked through the knots. When she finally emerged, she followed the scent of coffee and food to a bright kitchen where Maria was bustling about the stove. Xavier sat at a large wooden table, a newspaper open before him. He rose when she entered, gesturing to an empty chair. Please join us. Delilah sat gingerly, overwhelmed by the normality of the scene. It had been so long since she'd sat at a proper table for a meal that she felt almost as if she were play-acting at being civilized. Maria immediately placed a plate before her, piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Eat," she commanded. "Bébé needs strength." Xavier folded his newspaper, studying Delilah with those penetrating blue eyes. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better," Delilah admitted, taking a small bite of the eggs. They were delicious, and she had to restrain herself from devouring everything at once. "Thank you for the clothes and the room, and the food." "Maria's doing, not mine," Xavier replied with a small smile. "I'm hopeless with anything domestic." Maria snorted from the stove. "Truth, before me he eat beans from can every night, terrible." The casual banter between them made Delilah feel both more at ease and more out of place. This was a home with its own rhythms and relationships. She was an intruder, a complication. "Mr. York," she began hesitantly, setting down her fork. "I appreciate your kindness, but I don't understand why you're doing this. What do you expect from me in return?" Xavier's expression grew serious. "Nothing you're not willing to give, Miss Morgan. As I said yesterday, you're free to leave whenever you choose." "No one does something for nothing," Delilah said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "Especially not for someone like me." "Someone like you," Xavier repeated, his brow furrowing. Delilah gestured to her swollen belly. "Ruined, disgraced." Maria made a disapproving noise from the stove, but Xavier silenced her with a look. "I don't see ruin or disgrace," he said quietly. "I see a woman in difficult circumstances who deserves better than what the world has given her." Delilah stared at him, trying to detect any hint of deception in his face. Finding none, she looked down at her plate, suddenly fighting tears. "When I said you're free to go, I meant it," Xavier continued, "but you're also welcome to stay, at least until your child is born. The ranch is remote, peaceful, no one will bother you here." "And after the baby comes?" Delilah asked, voice barely above a whisper. "That's for you to decide," Xavier replied simply. "Now eat your breakfast before Maria takes personal offense." The housekeeper harumphed in agreement, refilling Delilah's coffee cup. "Eat now, worry later." Over the next few days, Delilah gradually regained her strength. Maria kept her well fed, clucking disapprovingly about how thin she was even with Bébé. The older woman became a constant, comforting presence, teaching Delilah how to prepare for the baby's arrival and sharing folk remedies for her backaches and swollen ankles. Xavier, meanwhile, kept a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite at mealtimes, asking after her comfort but never prying into her past. Delilah often caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, but he never made her feel uncomfortable or threatened. By the end of her first week at the Double Cross, Delilah had grown restless with inactivity. Used to hard work all her life, the enforced rest made her feel useless, a burden. One morning after breakfast, she approached Xavier as he was preparing to head out to check on the herd. "Mr. York," she said, clasping her hands before her, "I want to earn my keep." Xavier paused in the act of putting on his hat. "That's not necessary, Miss Morgan." "It is to me," Delilah insisted. "I'm not an invalid, I'm with child, but I'm still capable of working." Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" "I can cook, clean, mend clothing," Delilah listed. "I worked as a housekeeper before." She trailed off, unwilling to delve into that part of her past. Maria might appreciate the help, Xavier conceded. "But nothing strenuous." "Dr. Hammond visits from town every other week to check on Joe's rheumatism. He'll be here tomorrow. I'd like him to examine you, make sure everything is progressing well with the baby." Delilah tensed. "A doctor?" "I can't afford, consider it part of staying here," Xavier interrupted gently. "I'd feel better knowing both you and the child are healthy." Something in his tone made Delilah look at him more closely. There was genuine concern in his eyes, not just for her, but for her unborn child. It was a foreign sensation, having someone worry about her welfare without ulterior motives. "All right," she agreed reluctantly. "And thank you, Mr. York." "Xavier," he corrected with a small smile. "If you're going to be staying a while, we might as well dispense with formalities." Xavier, Delilah repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. Then you must call me Delilah. A moment of understanding passed between them, a small bridge built across the gulf of their different circumstances. Then Xavier tipped his hat and headed out, leaving Delilah to seek out Maria and offer her assistance. The housekeeper accepted Delilah's help with mixed feelings, clearly pleased to have another pair of hands but protective of her domain. They reached a compromise. Delilah would help with lighter tasks like mending and meal preparation, while Maria handled the more strenuous cleaning. That evening, as Delilah sat on the porch shelling peas, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Xavier returned from his day's work, dusty and tired but with a look of satisfaction on his face. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Good day," Delilah asked as he climbed the porch steps. Xavier nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Brought the herd down from the north pasture. Grass is getting thin up there." He eyed the bowl of peas in her lap. "I see Maria put you to work." "At my insistence," Delilah confirmed. "It feels good to be useful." Xavier settled into a chair beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. The setting sun cast golden light across the landscape, turning the scrubby Texas plain into something almost beautiful. "You never did tell me how you ended up at that auction," Xavier said after a moment of companionable silence, Delilah's hands stilled on the peas. "No, I didn't." Xavier waited, not pushing but making it clear he was willing to listen if she wanted to speak. Delilah sighed, resuming her work with the peas to avoid meeting his eyes. "It's not a pretty story. Few are out here." After another moment of hesitation, Delilah began to speak, her voice low but steady. "I was working as a housekeeper for a family in Austin, good position, respectable. The son of the house." She faltered, then continued. "He took an interest in me, said all the things a girl wants to hear, promised marriage." Xavier's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "When I discovered I was with child, I told him, expecting him to keep his promises." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Instead, he denied everything, said I was trying to trap him, that I'd been with other men. His mother called me a harlot, dismissed me without references." She shelled a pea with more force than necessary, the pod splitting violently between her fingers. "No one would hire a pregnant woman without references. I took what work I could find, laundry, cleaning, whatever kept food in my belly. But as the child grew, work became harder to find." Xavier's voice was carefully neutral when he asked, "How did you end up in Redemption?" "A man offered me passage in his wagon train, said there was work in the territories for anyone willing. I should have known better, but I was desperate." Delilah's voice grew hollow. "Once we were far from civilization, he revealed his true intentions, said I owed him for the passage. When I refused his advances, he decided to recoup his investment by selling my labor contract at the next town." "Redemption," Xavier supplied grimly. Delilah nodded. "The auctioneer took one look at my condition and decided to make a spectacle of it. You know the rest." A heavy silence fell between them. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, painting the sky in vivid streaks of orange and purple. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Xavier finally said, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "No one deserves such treatment." Delilah looked at him then, really looked at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong, determined. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but striking in his intensity. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the auction. Xavier was quiet for so long that Delilah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reflective. "My mother was unmarried when she had me," he said. "My father was a Union soldier passing through her town during the war. He promised to return for her after his enlistment ended. He never did." He turned to look at Delilah, his eyes shadowed in the twilight. "She faced the same scorn, the same mockery, worked herself to death trying to provide for me, died when I was 12. No one showed her mercy when she needed it most." Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. "So when you saw me?" "I saw her," Xavier confirmed simply, "and I couldn't walk away." In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection formed not of attraction or circumstance, but of shared understanding. Two people who knew what it meant to be judged by society's harshest standards. Delilah reached out hesitantly, placing her hand over his on the arm of the chair. "Thank you for telling me." Xavier turned his hand, briefly squeezing hers before releasing it. "We should head in. Night's coming on, and Maria will have supper waiting." As they rose to enter the house, Delilah felt lighter somehow, as if sharing even a portion of her burden had lessened its weight. And perhaps, she thought as she watched Xavier hold the door for her, she wasn't the only one who'd found some small measure of peace in the telling. Dr. Hammond arrived the following afternoon, a portly man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. After examining Joe's arthritic hands and prescribing a new liniment, he turned his attention to Delilah. The examination took place in her bedroom, with Maria present for propriety. Dr. Hammond was professional and gentle, listening to the baby's heartbeat with his stethoscope and palpating Delilah's abdomen with practiced hands. "Strong heartbeat," he declared approvingly. "Good size for around 7 months, I'd say. Have you felt regular movement?" Delilah nodded. "Especially at night. Sometimes it feels like the baby is dancing." Dr. Hammond chuckled. "Active one then, that's a good sign." His expression grew more serious. "You're underweight for this stage, though. Need to put on more pounds before delivery." "Maria is working on that," Delilah said with a small smile. "I've never eaten so well in my life." "Good, good." The doctor packed away his instruments. "Any pain, bleeding, unusual discharge?" Delilah shook her head, blushing slightly at the direct questions. "Excellent. Keep resting, eating well, and walking a bit each day for circulation." He patted her hand paternally. "You'll need to start preparing for the birth soon. Do you have someone to attend you when the time comes?" Delilah glanced uncertainly at Maria, who stepped forward decisively. "I deliver many babies in Mexico," she stated, "but good if doctor close by too." Dr. Hammond nodded. "Send for me when her pains start. Barring complications, I see no reason why you shouldn't have a healthy delivery, Miss Morgan." After the doctor left, Xavier found Delilah in the kitchen, helping Maria prepare dinner. "Good news?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Dr. Hammond says everything appears normal," Delilah confirmed, a hint of relief in her voice. "The baby is healthy." "I'm glad to hear it," Xavier said sincerely. He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking, the small cabin near the creek might suit you better than the guest room, especially after the baby comes. More privacy, but close enough if you need anything." "It needs some work, but Joe and I could have it ready in a couple of weeks." Delilah stared at him in surprise. "You do that, if you want it," Xavier said with a shrug that didn't quite hide the importance of his offer. "It's just sitting empty otherwise." "I'd like that very much," Delilah said softly. "Thank you." Maria bustled between them, muttering about men standing in doorways when there was work to be done. Xavier retreated with a grin, and Delilah returned to chopping vegetables. A warm feeling spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. True to his word, Xavier and Joe began work on the cabin the very next day. It was a simple structure, one main room with a small bedroom attached but solidly built. Over the following 2 weeks, they repaired the roof, replaced broken window panes, and built new furniture, including a small cradle that Joe carved himself. Delilah visited daily to check on their progress, offering suggestions and helping where she could. She found herself looking forward to these visits, to watching Xavier work with his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms bronzed by the sun. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the cabin, and something unspoken would pass between them before one or the other looked away. By the end of the 2nd week, the cabin was ready. Maria helped Delilah move her few possessions from the main house, adding little touches to make the space more home-like: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, dried flowers in a pottery vase. That evening, Delilah stood in the center of her new home, marveling at the transformation. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. It wasn't grand, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly hers. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Xavier stood on the threshold, holding a small wooden box. Housewarming gift, he explained, offering it to her. May I come in? Delilah stepped back to allow him entry, curious about the box in her hands. Opening it, she found a collection of baby items, tiny knitted booties, a soft blanket, a silver rattle. Xavier, she breathed, running her fingers over the delicate items. These are beautiful. The blanket and booties are from Maria, he admitted. The rattle was mine, one of the few things I have from my childhood. Delilah looked up at him, deeply touched. I can't accept this. It's too precious. I want the baby to have it, Xavier insisted quietly. It should be used, not sitting in a drawer gathering dust. Their fingers brushed as Delilah replaced the rattle in the box, and neither pulled away immediately. The contact, brief as it was, sent a tremor through Delilah that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. I should let you rest, Xavier said, breaking the moment. If you need anything, the main house is just a short walk. Thank you, Delilah said, following him to the door, for everything. Xavier paused on the threshold, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Good night, Delilah. Good night, Xavier. As she closed the door behind him, Delilah pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart beat an unfamiliar rhythm. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to feel anything beyond fear and desperation that she scarcely recognized the emotions stirring within her. Attraction, interest, perhaps even the beginnings of something deeper. The realization frightened her. She was in no position to entertain such feelings pregnant with another man's child, dependent on Xavier's charity, her future uncertain. And yet, as she moved about her new home, preparing for bed, she couldn't help but replay their brief touch in her mind, wondering if he had felt the same spark she had. The next morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect early autumn day. Delilah awoke feeling more refreshed than she had in months. The baby kicked vigorously as she dressed, as if sharing her good mood. Settle down, little one, she murmured, rubbing her belly affectionately. We have work to do today. She had decided to plant a small vegetable garden beside the cabin, something to occupy her time and contribute to the ranch's provisions. Maria had provided seeds and cuttings, and Joe had tilled a plot of soil for her the previous day. As she worked the earth, planting beans, carrots, and herbs, Delilah felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The sun warmed her back, birdsong filled the air, and the physical labor, though she was careful not to overexert herself, felt good after weeks of relative inactivity. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice Xavier approaching until his shadow fell across the garden plot. He carried a canteen of water and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Thought you might need these, he said, offering both items. Sun's getting stronger. Delilah accepted gratefully, placing the hat on her head and taking a long drink of cool water. Thank you, I lost track of time. Xavier knelt beside her, examining her work. Looks like you know what you're doing. My grandmother taught me, Delilah explained, a fond smile crossing her face at the memory. She could make anything grow, even in the poorest soil. A useful skill out here, Xavier observed. He reached out, gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The touch was brief but deliberate, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. Delilah's breath caught, her eyes meeting his. Something shifted in Xavier's gaze, a decision made, a barrier crossed. Delilah, he began, his voice lower than usual. A shout from the direction of the main house interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Joe was calling for Xavier, urgency in his tone. Xavier rose quickly, his expression regretful. I should see what that's about. Of course, Delilah replied, trying to hide her disappointment. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then turned and strode toward the house. Delilah watched him go, her heart beating rapidly. Whatever moment had been building between them had passed, but its echo remained, leaving her both unsettled and strangely hopeful. The cause of Joe's urgency soon became apparent. A group of riders was approaching the ranch, 5 men, moving with purpose rather than haste. Xavier returned to Delilah's cabin, his expression grave. I want you to go inside and stay there until I come for you, he said without preamble. Alarm flashed through Delilah. Why, what's happening? Probably nothing, Xavier said, his tone deliberately casual. Just some visitors I wasn't expecting. Best if you stay out of sight for now. Delilah recognized the protective intent behind his words. Do you think they're looking for me? Xavier's silence was answer enough. Who are they? She pressed, fear creeping into her voice. I don't know yet, Xavier admitted. But Joe recognized one of them as a man who works for Gerald Blackwell, a rancher from near Austin. Austin, where the father of her child lived. Delilah's hands instinctively went to her belly. I won't let them take you, Xavier said, seeing her distress. But I need you to trust me and stay inside. Can you do that? Delilah nodded, suddenly feeling very vulnerable in the open space of her garden. She retreated into the cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched Xavier stride confidently toward the approaching riders, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. The men reined in a respectful distance from the house. Even from her position, Delilah could see that they were trail-worn and dusty, having clearly ridden hard to reach the double cross. Their leader, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard, dismounted and approached Xavier. Delilah couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see Xavier's posture relaxed on the surface, but with an underlying tension she'd come to recognize. The discussion seemed civil enough, with no overt hostility, but Xavier's stance remained protective, positioned between the strangers and the path to her cabin. After what seemed an eternity, the men remounted their horses. The leader and Xavier exchanged what appeared to be terse parting words, and then the group rode away, heading back toward town. Xavier remained where he stood until the riders were well out of sight, then turned and walked with measured steps toward Delilah's cabin. His expression as he approached set her heart racing with apprehension. When he entered, Delilah was waiting, her hands clasped tightly before her. Who were they? She asked immediately. Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. They work for a man named Gerald Blackwell. His son, Thomas, is apparently looking for a young woman who matches your description. Delilah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Thomas Blackwell, she whispered, the father of my child. Xavier nodded grimly. So I gathered. What did they want to find you? Xavier said bluntly. Apparently, Thomas Blackwell has had a change of heart. He's telling everyone you stole valuable items from his family home before disappearing. They're calling it theft, with a substantial reward for your return. A bitter laugh escaped Delilah. I took nothing but the clothes on my back. This is his way of saving face, making me a thief instead of the woman he wronged. Xavier sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Did you tell anyone where you were headed when you left Austin? Delilah shook her head. I had no destination in mind, just away. A thought struck her, causing her eyes to widen in alarm. The man who brought me to redemption, could he have sent word back to the Blackwells? Possibly, Xavier conceded. Or someone from town might have recognized you from a description and sent word hoping for reward money. What did you tell them? Delilah asked, fear evident in her voice. That I hadn't seen anyone matching your description, Xavier replied steadily. That I run a cattle ranch, not a way station for fugitives. Relief washed over Delilah, quickly followed by renewed anxiety. They'll keep looking. If they find me, they'll take me back. No, Xavier said, with such conviction that Delilah's gaze snapped to his face. They won't. You don't understand, Delilah protested. The Blackwells are one of the wealthiest families in Central Texas. They have influence, connections, and I have a deed to this land and a rifle, Xavier interrupted calmly. You're under my protection now, Delilah. I won't let them take you against your will. The fierce certainty in his voice sent a shiver through Delilah that wasn't entirely fear. Why would you risk yourself like that for me? Xavier was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes searching her face. I think you know why, he finally said, his voice low and intimate in the confined space of the cabin. Delilah's breath caught. She did know, or at least suspected. The same awareness that had been growing in her own heart was reflected in Xavier's gaze, a connection deeper than charity or obligation. It's too soon, she whispered. though whether she was trying to convince him or herself, she wasn't certain. "I'm carrying another man's child. My life is complicated beyond measure. I'm not asking for promises, Delilah," Xavier said gently. "Just trust. Can you give me that much?" Delilah met his gaze, finding only sincerity there. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, I trust you, Xavier." A smile, warm and genuine, transformed his serious features. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." The promise hung between them, fragile yet powerful. Outside, the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Within the cabin's walls, something new and tentative took root, a possibility neither had dared hope for amidst the harsh realities of their lives. The days following the visit from Blackwell's men passed in tense vigilance. Xavier doubled the watch around the ranch, and Joe rode into town daily to gather news and rumors. Delilah rarely ventured beyond the immediate vicinity of her cabin, her advancing pregnancy making her both more visible and more vulnerable. Despite the underlying anxiety, life at the Double Cross continued its steady rhythm. The cattle required attention regardless of human dramas, and the approaching winter meant preparations had to be made. Delilah threw herself into domestic tasks, preserving garden vegetables with Maria's guidance and knitting tiny garments for her coming child. Xavier found reasons to visit her cabin daily, bringing firewood, checking the roof for leaks, delivering news from town. Each visit lasted a little longer than necessary, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. They spoke of their childhoods, their hopes, their disappointments. Delilah learned of Xavier's struggle to establish his ranch after years of drifting from job to job across the West. Xavier heard of Delilah's dreams of becoming a teacher before life had taken an unexpected turn. Neither spoke directly of feelings developing between them, but the awareness was there in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment of comfortable silence. It was a courtship unlike any either had experienced, cautious, unhurried, built on mutual respect rather than passionate declarations. October gave way to November, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of winter. Delilah's pregnancy advanced into its final weeks, her belly now so pronounced that even the loosest dresses strained to contain it. The baby was active, especially at night, keeping her awake with vigorous movements that sometimes made her gasp. One such night, unable to find a comfortable position for sleep, Delilah wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped onto her small porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like frozen diamonds across the vast Texas sky. Her breath formed clouds in the chill air as she rubbed her aching back. The soft crunch of boots on gravel alerted her to Xavier's approach. He often made late-night rounds of the property, checking on the animals and ensuring all was secure before retiring. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stopping at the foot of her porch steps. Delilah smiled ruefully, placing a hand on her belly. "Someone else has other ideas." Xavier climbed the steps to join her, his expression concerned in the moonlight. "Are you all right? Should I send for Dr. Hammond?" "It's not time yet," Delilah assured him, "just restlessness." "The doctor said it's normal in these final weeks." Xavier nodded, relief evident in his posture. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. At Delilah's nod, he settled next to her on the small bench, their shoulders almost touching. The night's stillness enveloped them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the soft whisper of wind through the dry grass. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed in 2 months," Delilah murmured, gazing at the starlit landscape. "From that auction block to this." She shook her head in wonder. "It still feels like a dream I might wake from." "It's real," Xavier said simply. "You're safe here, Delilah, you and your child." As if in response to his words, the baby delivered a particularly energetic kick that made Delilah gasp and press a hand to her side. Xavier watched her with a mixture of fascination and concern. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not exactly," Delilah replied, shifting to find a more comfortable position. "It's strange feeling another life moving inside you, wonderful and terrifying at the same time." After a moment's hesitation, she reached for Xavier's hand. "Would you like to feel?" Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something softer, more vulnerable. Wordlessly, he nodded. Delilah guided his hand to the side of her belly where the baby was most active. For a moment, nothing happened, and she feared the child had settled. Then came a strong kick directly against Xavier's palm. His eyes widened in amazement. "That's remarkable," he breathed, genuine wonder in his voice. "He or she is saying hello," Delilah said with a small laugh, the intimacy of the moment bringing a flush to her cheeks. Xavier's hand remained on her belly, warm and gentle through the thin fabric of her nightgown. The baby kicked again, and a smile spread across his face, open, unguarded joy that transformed his usually serious features. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "You're keeping your mama awake, aren't you?" The simple tenderness of his words brought unexpected tears to Delilah's eyes. This man who had no obligation to her or her child spoke to her unborn baby with more care than its own father ever had. Xavier looked up, catching sight of her tears. "Delilah, did I say something wrong?" She shook her head, wiping hastily at her cheeks. "No, just the opposite." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand from her belly to her face, gently brushing away a tear with his thumb. The touch was so tender, so reverent that Delilah felt her breath catch. "Delilah," Xavier said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I know your heart has been badly used. I know you have every reason to distrust men's intentions, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are sincere." Delilah's heart pounded against her ribs. "Xavier, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I understand that your child must come first, that your future is uncertain, but whatever happens, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I care for you, deeply." The sincerity in his eyes left no room for doubt. This was no momentary passion, no calculated seduction. This was a man laying his heart bare, asking for nothing in return. Overwhelmed, Delilah did the only thing that felt right in that moment. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle, tentative kiss. Xavier remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, as if afraid to break the spell. Then his hand cupped her cheek more firmly, and he returned the kiss with restrained tenderness, letting her set the pace. When they parted, Delilah's eyes remained closed for a moment, savoring the warmth that spread through her body. When she opened them, Xavier was watching her with such naked adoration that it nearly took her breath away. "I never expected this," she whispered. "Never thought I could feel this way again, especially now." "Life rarely follows the path we expect," Xavier replied, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her cheek. "Sometimes it leads us somewhere better than we could have imagined." The baby chose that moment to deliver another vigorous kick, making Delilah laugh softly. "I think someone approves," she said, placing her hand over her belly. Xavier smiled, reluctantly withdrawing his hand from her face. "You should try to rest," he said. "It's getting colder and you need your strength." Though she was reluctant for the moment to end, Delilah knew he was right. Her back ached from sitting too long, and the night air had grown increasingly chill. Xavier helped her to her feet, his hand steady under her elbow. At the door to her cabin, he paused, hesitating as if unsure of the protocol in this new territory between them. Delilah solved his dilemma by rising on tiptoe to place another soft kiss on his lips. "Good night, Xavier." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Good night, Delilah." As she closed the door behind him, Delilah leaned against it, her heart fuller than it had been in months. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges they might face from Blackwell or her impending motherhood, she was no longer facing it alone. That knowledge carried her back to bed, where she finally found peaceful sleep, one hand resting protectively over the child who would soon join them in this unexpected new life. December arrived with a biting north wind and the threat of an early winter. Delilah's due date approached, bringing both anticipation and anxiety. Dr. Hammond visited weekly now, assuring her that everything was progressing normally, though he cautioned that first babies often came later than expected. "Could be Christmas before this little one makes an appearance," he told her during one examination, patting her hand reassuringly. The thought of spending Christmas with her child in her arms and Xavier by her side filled Delilah with a warmth that countered the winter chill. Their relationship had deepened since that moonlit kiss on her porch, though both maintained a certain restraint, aware of the complications her pregnancy and uncertain future presented. Xavier had taken to spending evenings at her cabin, helping her prepare for the baby's arrival. He built shelves for baby supplies, fashioned a rocking chair from seasoned oak, and even attempted to learn knitting from Maria, though his large hands struggled with the delicate needles. "I'm better with a hammer than yarn," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh after dropping stitches for the third time in a row. These quiet evenings were precious to Delilah, the comfortable silences, the gentle teasing, the way Xavier looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with something other than struggle and shame. The second week of December brought the season's first snowfall, a light dusting that transformed the ranch into a pristine wonderland. Delilah stood at her window watching the flakes drift lazily from a pearl-gray sky, one hand pressed to her lower back where a dull ache had been troubling her since morning. Maria arrived mid-morning with fresh bread and a pot of stew, clucking disapprovingly at Delilah's pallor. "You not sleep well?" she asked, setting her basket on the table. "The baby was restless," Delilah explained, wincing as another twinge worked its way across her back, "and my back has been aching something fierce." Maria's eyes narrowed assessingly. "How long ache in back?" "Since early morning," Delilah replied, moving to help unpack the basket. "It comes and goes." Maria gently but firmly pushed her into a chair. "You sit, let me look at you." With the practiced hands of an experienced midwife, Maria felt Delilah's belly nodding to herself. "Baby drop lower," she observed, "getting ready." A flutter of nervous anticipation went through Delilah. "Do you think it will be soon?" "Maybe yes, maybe no," Maria replied pragmatically. "First baby like to keep mama guessing, but back pain good sign things starting." As if to confirm her words, a sharper pain radiated across Delilah's lower back, making her inhale sharply. Maria nodded knowingly. "I stay today," she declared, her tone brooking no argument. "We see what happens." By mid-afternoon, the pattern had become unmistakable. What had begun as intermittent back pain had evolved into regular contractions, starting in Delilah's back and wrapping around to her abdomen. They were still far apart 15 minutes or more, but growing gradually stronger. "Should we send for Dr. Hammond?" Delilah asked after a particularly strong contraction left her breathless. Maria shook her head. "Not yet, still early, many hours before baby comes, especially first time." She patted Delilah's hand reassuringly. "But I send Joe to tell him be ready, yes, and tell Xavier." The mention of Xavier sent a different kind of flutter through Delilah's chest. Part of her wanted him near, while another part felt strangely shy about him seeing her in such a vulnerable state. As darkness fell, the snow thickened, blanketing the landscape in white. The contractions continued to intensify and come closer together, though still not close enough to suggest imminent birth. Maria encouraged Delilah to walk around the cabin between pains, helping her stay upright and moving. A knock at the door announced Xavier's arrival. He entered with a blast of cold air, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. His face was taut with concern as he took in the scene. Delilah leaning against the table, breathing heavily as a contraction eased. "Joe told me," he said, removing his hat and coat. "How are you holding up?" Before Delilah could answer, Maria intervened. "She doing good, strong like bull," she gestured to the fireplace. "You build up fire, going to be long night." Xavier complied, adding logs to the hearth and stoking the flames until they roared with renewed vigor. The extra heat was welcome as Delilah moved about the cabin, using movement to cope with the increasingly powerful contractions. As the evening progressed, the labor intensified. Delilah found herself leaning more heavily on Maria during contractions, the pain now demanding her full attention. Xavier remained a steady, supportive presence, fetching water, keeping the fire burning, and occasionally wiping Delilah's brow with a cool cloth. "Should we send for the doctor now?" he asked after witnessing a particularly strong contraction that left Delilah gasping. Maria checked her progress and shook her head. Roads getting bad with snow, still time before baby comes. If things change fast, then yes. Midnight came and went. The contractions grew closer now, only 5 or 6 minutes apart and more powerful. Delilah began to make low, guttural sounds during the peaks of pain, sounds she couldn't have controlled if she tried. Xavier's face reflected his distress at seeing her suffer. During a brief respite between contractions, he knelt beside the chair where she rested, taking her hand in his. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Delilah managed a tired smile. "You're already doing it," she whispered. "Just being here helps more than you know." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Delilah Morgan." Before she could respond, another contraction seized her, this one stronger than any before. She clutched Xavier's hand with surprising force, unable to suppress a cry of pain. Maria, who had been boiling water on the stove, hurried over. After a quick examination, she nodded decisively. "Getting close now, time to send for doctor." Xavier rose immediately. "I'll go myself, the snow's too heavy to send Joe." "No," Maria said firmly. "Road to town bad in storm." "You stay here, I need help." Delilah, between contractions, spoke up. "Maria delivered babies for years in Mexico. I trust her." She met Xavier's concerned gaze. "Please stay." The conflict was evident on his face, the desire to ensure she had the best medical care versus his reluctance to leave her. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but if there's any sign of trouble." "Then you ride like wind," Maria agreed. "Now help me get her to bed, time to get serious." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Delilah. The contractions came relentlessly now, barely giving her time to catch her breath between them. Maria directed her with calm efficiency, while Xavier supported her back, wiped her brow, and murmured encouragement in her ear. Just before dawn, Maria announced that it was time to push. Delilah, exhausted beyond measure, found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. With each contraction, she bore down with all her might, Maria's instructions guiding her efforts. "I see head," Maria exclaimed after a particularly powerful push. "One more big push, Delilah." Xavier's grip on her hand was steady, his voice at her ear unwavering. "You can do this, Delilah. You're almost there." With a final, monumental effort, Delilah pushed with every ounce of strength remaining in her body. There was a moment of searing pressure, then sudden release, followed by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the thin, indignant cry of a newborn. A girl. Maria announced triumphantly, lifting the squalling infant for Delilah to see. "Beautiful girl." Tears streamed down Delilah's face as Maria quickly cleaned the baby, cut the cord, and placed the tiny, red-faced infant on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." The baby's cries softened as she nestled against her mother's warmth. Delilah counted fingers and toes with wonder, marveling at the perfection of this new life. Xavier stood beside the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness. When Delilah looked up at him, she saw tears glistening in his eyes. "She's beautiful," he said softly, "just like her mother." Delilah held out her hand to him, and he took it, sinking to his knees beside the bed to be closer to her and the baby. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "You did all the hard work," Xavier replied with a gentle smile. He reached out tentatively, his large finger brushing the baby's tiny fist. To his evident delight, the infant's fingers curled reflexively around his. "She likes you," Delilah said, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Maria, who had been busy with the afterbirth and cleaning up, approached with a warm, damp cloth. "You did good, mamacita," she said approvingly. "Now you rest while I clean baby properly." She gently took the infant from Delilah's arms, cooing to her in Spanish as she carried her to the basin of warm water she had prepared. Left alone with Xavier, Delilah felt suddenly shy, aware of the intimacy they had just shared, of how vulnerable and exposed she had been during the birth. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort. I should let you rest, he said, starting to rise. Delilah tightened her grip on his hand. Stay, she said simply. Please. He settled back beside her, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Outside, the first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, casting the cabin in a soft, ethereal glow. Have you thought of a name? Xavier asked after a moment. Delilah nodded. Hope, she said softly. Her name is Hope. Xavier's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. It's perfect. Maria returned with the baby, now cleaned, swaddled in a soft blanket, and wearing one of the tiny caps Delilah had knitted. Here is your mama, Pequeñita, she crooned, placing the infant back in Delilah's arms. Baby Hope had quieted, her initial protests at entering the world replaced by the drowsy contentment of a newborn at her mother's breast. Her eyes, dark blue like all newborns, seemed to focus briefly on Delilah's face before drifting closed. I'll leave you three alone, Maria said, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Come get me if you need anything. After she left, a comfortable silence filled the cabin, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and the baby's occasional murmurs. Xavier remained beside the bed, his presence a comfort rather than an intrusion. Delilah, he said after a while, his voice low and serious, there's something I need to say. She looked up from her daughter's face, meeting his intent gaze. I love you, he said simply. I think I have since that day at the auction. Watching you bring this beautiful child into the world has only deepened those feelings. Delilah's heart swelled at his words, even as uncertainty flickered through her. Xavier, I'm not sure I can offer you. I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted gently. I just wanted you to know, whatever happens next, whatever you decide, that truth won't change. Tears filled Delilah's eyes anew. I don't deserve such devotion. You deserve that and more, Xavier said firmly. He reached out, carefully brushing a strand of hair from her face. You and Hope both. At the sound of her name, the baby stirred, her tiny face scrunching in a yawn that made both adults smile. I think I love you too, Delilah admitted softly, the words both frightening and freeing. But everything is so complicated. My past, Hope's father, the Blackwells. None of that matters to me, Xavier assured her. We can face whatever comes together if that's what you want. Delilah looked down at her daughter, then back at Xavier's earnest face. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential difficulties. But the man before her had already proven his steadfastness, his willingness to stand by her through the worst circumstances. I want to try, she whispered. I want us to be a family if you're willing to accept us both. Xavier's face transformed with joy. Nothing would make me happier, he said, his voice thick with emotion. May I? He hesitated, glancing at the baby. Understanding his unspoken request, Delilah carefully shifted Hope into his arms. He cradled the tiny infant with surprising confidence, his large hands gentle as they supported her head and body. Hello, Hope, he murmured, his voice taking on a tenderness Delilah had never heard before. Welcome to the world, little one. It's a big, sometimes scary place, but your mama and I will be right here to help you find your way. As Delilah watched this strong, capable man gazing at her daughter with such open adoration, the last of her reservations melted away. This was what she wanted for Hope, a man who would love and protect her as his own, who would show her through example what a good man should be, and for herself. A partner who saw her not as damaged goods or a burden, but as a woman of worth, of value, someone worth gold. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside the cabin, warmed by fire and newfound love, a family was born not of blood, but of choice, of commitment, of hearts finding home in each other. Spring arrived at the Double Cross Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The harsh Texas winter had given way to mild breezes and lengthening days, bringing with it a sense of renewal that matched the mood of the ranch's inhabitants. In the main house, preparations were underway for a celebration. Maria bustled about the kitchen, directing Joe and the other ranch hands in their tasks with the authority of a general commanding troops. Flowers there, she instructed, pointing to the center of the long dining table. And be careful with my good dishes. In the small bedroom that had once been Xavier's, Delilah sat before a mirror while Hope, now 4 months old, cooed happily in a cradle nearby. The baby had grown plump and strong over the winter months, her newborn fuzz replaced by soft curls the color of honey. Her eyes settled into a clear green that matched her mother's. Delilah smoothed the skirt of her new dress, a soft blue calico that Xavier had ordered special from a dressmaker in San Antonio. Her hair, longer now and restored to its natural luster, was arranged in a simple but elegant style atop her head. A knock at the door heralded Maria's arrival. The older woman entered, her usually stern features softened by a rare smile. "Ah, you look beautiful," she declared, moving to adjust a strand of Delilah's hair. "Like Angel," Delilah laughed softly. "Hardly that, but thank you, Maria, for everything." The two women had grown close over the winter months, with Maria serving as a surrogate mother to Delilah and doting grandmother to Hope. Her practical wisdom and unconditional support had been invaluable as Delilah adjusted to motherhood. "Patron is nervous like young boy," Maria confided with a conspiratorial wink. "Dropped his hat in water trough this morning." The thought of the usually composed Xavier in such a state made Delilah smile. "I'm a bit nervous myself," she admitted. Maria patted her shoulder reassuringly. "Normal." "Big day." She moved to the cradle, scooping up Hope with practiced ease. Little Princess all ready in her pretty dress. Hope gurgled happily at the attention, reaching for Maria's silver cross necklace with pudgy fingers. The baby had become the darling of the ranch, adored by the gruffest cowboys and cooed over by visitors from neighboring spreads. "It's time," Maria said, glancing at the small clock on the dresser. "They wait for you." Delilah took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt one final time before rising. The past 4 months had been a journey of healing and discovery, learning to trust again, to believe in her own worth, to embrace a future she had never dared imagine. There had been challenges, of course. Word had eventually reached Gerald Blackwell that his son's stolen property had been located at the Double Cross Ranch. His men had returned in greater numbers in February, this time with a letter demanding Delilah's return to Austin to face charges of theft. Xavier had stood his ground, producing documentation from Dr. Hammond attesting to Delilah's condition when she arrived at the ranch, along with sworn statements from witnesses at the auction. He had made it clear that any attempt to remove Delilah or her child by force would be met with all the resistance he and his men could muster. The standoff had ended in an unexpected way when Xavier offered a different solution: financial compensation to the Blackwells in exchange for their agreement to relinquish all claims against Delilah. It had cost him a significant portion of his savings, but as he told Delilah later, "Your freedom and peace of mind are worth every penny." Thomas Blackwell had never appeared himself, apparently content to let his father handle the unfortunate situation, while he proceeded with his engagement to a banker's daughter in Austin. His cowardice had been the final confirmation for Delilah that she and Hope were better off without any connection to him. With that shadow lifted from their future, Xavier had asked Delilah a question she had once thought she would never hear again, a question she had answered with tears of joy and a resounding yes. Now, as she followed Maria from the bedroom to the main room of the ranch house, Delilah's heart beat a rapid rhythm of anticipation and happiness. The space had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, the furniture rearranged to create an aisle leading to the stone fireplace where Xavier waited. He stood tall and proud in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. Beside him stood the circuit preacher who had arrived the previous day, Bible in hand, and a benevolent smile on his weathered face. The ranch hands and neighbors who had gathered for the occasion turned as Delilah entered, murmurs of appreciation rippling through the small crowd. But Delilah had eyes only for Xavier, whose expression as he beheld her was worth more than all the gold in Texas. Maria handed Hope to Joe, who held the baby with surprising gentleness, before taking her place beside the other ranch hands. Delilah walked slowly toward Xavier, each step bringing her closer to the future she had chosen. When she reached him, he took her hands in his blue eyes shining with emotion. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, for her ears alone. The preacher cleared his throat, opening his Bible as the guests settled into expectant silence. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, the traditional vows made more poignant by the journey that had brought them to this moment. When Xavier slipped a gold band onto Delilah's finger, crafted from part of that same pouch of gold that had purchased her freedom at the auction, tears glistened in both their eyes. "By the power vested in me," the preacher concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Xavier needed no prompting to kiss his bride. His lips met Delilah's in a tender embrace that held both promise and passion, the culmination of months of growing love and trust. The gathered guests erupted in cheers and applause. Jo stepped forward with hope, who reached eagerly for her mother. Delilah took her daughter, and Xavier enfolded them both in his embrace, a family united not by blood, but by something far stronger. The celebration that followed was joyous and boisterous, with plenty of food, music, and dancing. As evening approached, the newlyweds slipped away from the festivities, entrusting hope to Maria's care for the night. Xavier had prepared a surprise for Delilah, the small cabin where she had first lived on the ranch, transformed into a honeymoon retreat with fresh flowers, soft linens, and candles casting a golden glow over everything. "It's where you gave life to hope," he explained as they stood on the threshold. "Where I first told you I loved you, it seemed fitting to begin our marriage here as well." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Delilah turned into his arms. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "Everything is perfect." Later, as they lay entwined in the soft darkness, Delilah rested her head on Xavier's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I would find happiness again," she confessed. "After everything that happened, I believed that part of my life was over." Xavier's fingers traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it," he said softly. "When I rode into redemption that day, I never imagined I'd find my future on an auction block." Delilah propped herself up on one elbow, gazing at her husband's face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. "Why did you really bid for me that day? The truth." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When I saw you standing there, so proud despite everything, something in me recognized something in you. A kind of kinship of spirits, I suppose. I couldn't bear to see them break that spirit." He reached up, tracing the curve of her cheek with tender fingers. "I said you were worth gold that day. I didn't know then how true those words would prove to be." Delilah leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the embrace. In the darkest moment of her life, this man had seen value where others saw only shame. He had offered her not just rescue, but respect and, ultimately, a love she had never dared hope for. Outside, the Texas night was alive with the sounds of spring frogs calling from the creek, the rustle of new leaves in the breeze, the distant howl of a coyote. Inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Xavier and Delilah York found the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be, with exactly who you are meant to be with. "I love you, Mrs. York," Xavier murmured as sleep began to claim them both. "And I love you," Delilah replied, her heart full to overflowing. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." 5 years later, the Double Cross Ranch had prospered beyond Xavier's most ambitious dreams. Strategic breeding of his cattle herd and wise land investments had expanded his holdings to include some of the most fertile grazing land in the county. The small, functional ranch house had been enlarged and improved, though it maintained the warm, welcoming atmosphere that made it a home rather than just a house. On a bright summer morning, Delilah stood on the wide front porch, watching as Xavier gave 5-year-old Hope her daily riding lesson on a gentle pony named Cookie. The little girl sat proudly in her child-sized saddle, her honey-colored curls bouncing as she guided the pony in careful circles around the corral. "Look, Mama," Hope called, waving enthusiastically. "I'm doing it all by myself. I see you, sweetheart." Delilah called back, pride swelling in her chest. "You're doing wonderfully." Xavier walked beside the pony, one hand hovering near Hope's back, ready to catch her if she should slip. His protective stance made Delilah smile despite Hope's increasing independence. Her father remained vigilant, determined to keep her safe while allowing her to grow brave. At Delilah's side, 3-year-old Daniel York clutched the porch railing, his blue eyes so like his father's wide with envy and admiration as he watched his big sister ride. "My turn next, Mama," he asked, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. Delilah ruffled his dark hair affectionately. "When you're a bit bigger, little man. Right now, Cookie is still too tall for you." Daniel's lower lip protruded in a brief pout before his attention was diverted by the arrival of Joe, now stooped with age but still an integral part of ranch operations. The old cowboy had become a surrogate grandfather to the York children, telling them stories of the old days and sneaking them peppermint candy when he thought their parents weren't looking. "There's my deputy," Joe called, producing a small wooden horse from his pocket. "Made this for you, young fella." Daniel's face lit up as he accepted the gift, momentarily forgetting his disappointment about the pony. "Thank you, Uncle Joe. Look, Mama, it's just like Papa's horse." "It certainly is," Delilah agreed, smiling gratefully at Joe. The old man winked, tipping his hat before continuing toward the barn. In the corral, Xavier was lifting Hope from the pony, her riding lesson complete for the day. The little girl threw her arms around her father's neck, and he swung her in a circle that made her squeal with delight before setting her on her feet. Hope raced toward the house, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, did you see? Papa says I'm a natural horsewoman." "I did see," Delilah confirmed, kneeling to embrace her daughter. "You're getting better every day." Xavier followed at a more sedate pace, wiping his brow with a bandana. At 35, he was in his prime, still lean and strong from daily physical work, though with a few strands of silver beginning to appear at his temples. The years had only enhanced his rugged good looks, and Delilah still found herself watching him with the same fluttering heart she'd experienced when they first fell in love. "Daniel's turn tomorrow," Xavier announced as he climbed the porch steps. "Just a short ride with Papa holding the reins." "How does that sound, son?" Daniel's eyes widened with excitement. "Really, Papa, my own ride." "Really," Xavier confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're growing up fast, partner." Delilah straightened, one hand moving automatically to her rounded belly where their third child, not yet showing but recently confirmed by Dr. Hammond, was just beginning to grow. They hadn't told the children yet, wanting to wait until the early, uncertain weeks had passed. Xavier's gaze followed her movement, a soft smile curving his lips. He stepped close, placing his hand over hers on her abdomen. "How are you feeling today?" he asked quietly. "Just fine," Delilah assured him. "No more morning sickness, thank goodness." Their moment of private connection was interrupted by Maria's call from inside the house. "Niños, lunch is ready, come wash hands." The children scampered inside, eager for food and perhaps a story from Maria, who at 75 showed no signs of slowing down or relinquishing her position as the heart of the household. Left alone on the porch, Xavier drew Delilah into his arms. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. York? I believe you mentioned it when you brought me coffee this morning," Delilah replied with a teasing smile. "And again when you helped me hang the laundry, and possibly once more when you caught me napping in the rocking chair." Xavier laughed, the sound still capable of sending warmth spreading through her chest. "Well, it bears repeating. I love you, Delilah York, more with each passing day." He bent to kiss her, his lips warm and familiar against hers. After 5 years of marriage, their passion had not dimmed, it had merely deepened, enriched by shared experiences, mutual respect, and the family they were building together. "I love you too," Delilah murmured when they parted. And I thank God every day for bringing you to that auction." Xavier's expression grew serious, his hands moving to frame her face. "You saved me as much as I saved you, you know. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions, building something I had no one to share with." Delilah covered his hands with her own. "We saved each other then." The sound of a small crash from inside the house, followed by Daniel's worried "uh-oh" and Maria's exasperated exclamation, broke the moment. Laughing, they moved toward the door, hands clasped together as they went to join their children. Whatever minor crisis awaited them inside, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful day in redemption together, with love and strength enough to overcome any obstacle. As they crossed the threshold, Delilah paused for a moment, taking in the scene before her. Hope helping Maria pick up what appeared to be a broken plate, Daniel looking contrite but already being consoled by the kind-hearted housekeeper, sunlight streaming through the windows to cast the whole tableau in golden light. This was her life now, full of love, purpose, and belonging. A life she could never have imagined on that terrible day when she stood on the auction block, mocked and degraded for her condition. Xavier had said she was worth gold that day. In the years since, he had proven those words true in countless ways, showing her through his love and respect that her value had never been diminished by her circumstances. And in return, she had given him the greatest gift she could offer a family, a home filled with laughter and love, and the certainty that he would never again have to face life's joys or sorrows alone. Together, they had transformed a moment of despair into a lifetime of happiness, proving that even in the harsh realities of the Wild West, love could flourish in the most unlikely places, between the most unexpected hearts. For Delilah and Xavier York, that was worth more than all the gold in Texas. It was worth everything.